This is one of the bandsaws that we have in the classroom. It's called a bandsaw because there's a wheel on the top of the saw and a wheel on the bottom of the saw. So the blade just goes continuously around in one direction. So what that means is when you interact with the blade, it's always going down. So that means the force of the machine is always pushing down. When you're cutting with the machine, as long as you have your material flat on the table, it can't kick out of your hands or fly off. Anytime you're cutting with the saw and you are having trouble or something just isn't right, you can always just let go of the material and step back. Because all the force is taken up by the table, your material won't do anything, it will just sit there. The bandsaw has an adjustable guard that's secured with a wing screw on the back of the saw. Loosen the wing screw and lift the guard up. So we need to make sure the guard is set to within 1/2 inch of the stock before turning on the power. If you fail to adjust the guard to within 1/2 inch of the stock, it may lead to a serious injury. More than 1 inch of exposed blade could turn into a serious injury. You can get a lot of body parts in that amount of space. Using the saw, don't put your fingers closer than 6 inches from the blade, and don't put your hands directly in line with the blade. To avoid bending or breaking the blade, you should not twist or bend the saw blade with your stock. To avoid bending or breaking the blade, put relief cuts in. These relief cuts relieve the pressure on the blade so that when you're turning the blade, it doesn't bind up on the back. You'll notice that the relief cuts don't go all the way down to my line. We want to cut a little bit away from the line because the bandsaw is a rough cutting saw. When we're all done, we will then need to go over to the sander and sand it down right to our line. If when you're done cutting and sanding, you don't have your line anymore, then that means your pattern is gone. Once your pattern is gone, you can't tell what the shape of your project is supposed to look like. So make sure that that line remains when you're all done cutting and sanding. Notice how I still am able to see the line of my pattern. When cutting with a bandsaw, unless you're doing short relief cuts, you never want to back out of a cut. Backing out of the cut will actually pull the blade and you can pull it off of the wheels. When you're cutting with a bandsaw, if you twist the blade and the blade should break, there's a chance that the blade may come out. If the blade comes out, it will either go to the left over and run into the machine, or it will go to the right. If it goes to the right and flies out there, you don't want to be standing over there. So never stand on the right hand side of a bandsaw while it's running. When you're done with the saw, never clean the material off with your hands when the machine is running. Always use a stick that's 10 inches long. To keep your hands away from the blade while you're cutting, use a push stick. You can use a push stick to help keep your hands away from the blade. You never want to reach around a moving saw blade. Keep your hands away from the saw blade. Always make sure that the machine comes to a complete stop before you walk away. And drop that guard back down so it's ready for the next person. Anytime you're using the bandsaw, you need to make sure that you have a spotter. Someone standing here watching you, making sure that you are keeping your hands away from the blade, making sure that you're using a push stick, and that you have on your safety glasses. You always have to have a spotter while you're on the bandsaw. It's the operator's responsibility to make sure that they have a spotter and that they listen to the spotter, and the spotter is required to stay here until the operator is done. This is one of the scroll saws that we have in the lab. The scroll saw is like the bandsaw in that it's very useful for cutting irregular shapes, inside and outside curves. The difference is that the scroll saw has a very small blade. It's very tiny, and so it can cut much tighter circles. So with the scroll saw, you don't have to make relief cuts. Unlike the bandsaw, however, where the bandsaw, all of the force of the blade is going down, with the scroll saw, the saw blade is going up and down. So all of the force of the machine isn't taken up by the table. So in order, if you can't hold your material down with your hands, where sometimes you can just hold it with your hands, if you can't, we have this pressure foot you can put down on the material that will help keep the material from coming up while you're cutting. The scroll saw has a little hole in the table here. This is called the throat. You need to make sure that if you get tiny pieces stuck down in the throat, shut the saw off and wait for it to come to a stop before you reach in and grab those. Even though this is a very small blade, it still can cut you, so you need to make sure that you don't have your fingers directly in line with the blade. This saw blade has to be under tension, so this is the tensioning knob up here at the top that helps keep it nice and tight. It needs to be nice and tight. When you're cutting with the scroll saw, make sure that you're pushing straight in on the blade, and you're not trying to push the blade, pull the blade from side to side. Pulling the blade from side to side could break the blade.